Good afternoon. I will convene the afternoon session of the regular meeting of the Board of County Commissioners for Tuesday, February 6, 2024. As soon as I find my agenda. First item on our agenda today is a third reading and continued public hearing on Ordinance 24-01 in the matter of amending Lane Code 16.244, etc. And first up, I will open a public hearing. I'll open a second public hearing on the following matter, which has been continued from January 23rd, 2024, on Ordinance 24-01 in the matter of amending Lane Code 16.244 5B4 and 10.271 5B4 to define the term footprint as used in regards to the replacement, repair, alteration, or modification of a structure in the floodway and adopting a savings and severability clause, file number 509 PA2305424. The ordinance before us is a county-initiated Type 4 legislative land use application to amend the county's code. This hearing will follow the procedures for Type 4 land use applications as required by Lane Code Chapter 14. The applicable criteria to the proposed Lane Code amendments are located in Lane Code 12.100.005, 12.100.050, and 16.252, and applicable Lane County Rural Comprehensive Plan goals. The order of proceedings for this hearing will be first the report by staff, followed by public testimony, then additional comments by staff. The board's decision may be appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals in accordance with ORS Chapter 197. The, quote, raise it or waive it, end quote, requirement of ORS 197.797, Section 1, and 197.835, Section 3, does not apply to legislative proceedings. However, if a party has the opportunity to object to a procedural error but fails to do so before the close of the record, that procedural error may not be preserved on appeal before LUBA. I will now call for disclosures of conflicts of interest. All commissioners are required to disclose any potential or actual conflicts of interest that they have with the proposal before us. That means if a commissioner or one of their relatives could be financially impacted, positively or negatively, by the proposal, that should be disclosed for the record, followed by a statement that the commissioner can or cannot proceed. If there is an actual conflict, that must be disclosed on the record, and then the conflicted commissioner must recuse themselves and step out of the room until the public hearing has concluded. I will now ask commissioners one at a time who wish to perhaps disclose any conflicts, and I will begin with Commissioner Farr.
I have none.
Commissioner Seneca?
None.
Commissioner Buck?
None.
Vice Chair Lovall?
None.
And I have none as Chair, Lori Trieger. Does any member of the public wish to challenge any commissioner's ability to participate in this public hearing? Seeing none, Diana, is there anyone online?
I will check. If anyone online wishes to challenge anything on the board's authority for this public hearing, please raise your hand. No one online.
Thank you. Seeing none, I will hand the presentation over to staff, and sitting with our county administrator is Rachel Surslove today. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Chair Trieger, and good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm just going to pull up a quick presentation here for you. Okay. Good afternoon. For the record, again, this is Rachel Surslove, Staff Planner, and I'm here before you regarding the Floodway Code Amendment Project. And today this is a third reading and a continued public hearing on Ordinance 2401. And staff was last before you for a public hearing on January 23rd, and at that time, staff provided an overview of the proposed amendments, and the board heard public testimony on the ordinance. At that time, the board left the record open and moved to continue the hearing to today to provide more time to deliberate on the ordinance. And I'll just give a quick recap of my presentation from 2 weeks ago. The proposed draft code contains changes to the floodway provisions as motioned by the Lane County Planning Commission. And that proposed code defines the term footprint in regards to existing structures in the floodway. It does allow for a reorientation or reconfiguration of a structure's footprint when being replaced or modified in the floodway. And lastly, the proposed code contains an allowance for structures that were inadvertently removed from the floodway to be replaced if the structure was removed within 5 years of adoption of this ordinance. And just to be clear, the proposed code before you does not allow an expansion of the footprint to structures being replaced in the floodway. And just to quickly recap what the board's options are for the ordinance today, they're very similar to what they were last time. You may move to close the public hearing and approve the ordinance as written. To move to close the public hearing and continue to deliberations at a date certain. And this option is if the board has enough information to make a decision on the ordinance and if no changes are desired to the proposed code. Or lastly, the board can move to continue the public hearing to a date certain, and this should be chosen if the board still needs information in order to make a decision on the ordinance, or if the board wants to see changes to the proposed code. And staff is recommending option 1, that the ordinance as written be adopted. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from commissioners, from staff, for the staff before we move into public testimony? Will, of course, be time afterwards. Seeing none. I will now move into the public testimony portion. I have 2 people so far signed up to give testimony here in Harris Hall, and I understand there may be a few people online. So we'll begin with the folks here in Harris Hall, then I'll turn it over to Diana for the online comment, and then I'll ask again if there's anyone else present who wishes to speak here in person. So first up, we have Lori, it looks like Lori McDonald. Please correct me if I got your name wrong. You may step to the podium here. I'm sorry?
Lori Wellborn.
Is that you?
Yes.
Great, so step to the podium, you can state your name for the record, and as soon as you do, you'll see a 3-minute timer on the wall, and you may begin your public testimony, and keep an eye on the time. Thank you for being here.
Okay, thank you. My name is Lori Wellborn. I have lived in Oregon all but 1 year of my life, most of it in Drain, which is all flood central. I literally watched as I was a kid from my front living room, the neighbor's porch from across the street, go down the road. So I understand and respect the power of water. The issue that we have in our area is that most of these homes, as you know, are falling apart, and it's hard to replace them. You've accepted that we can do that but not expand our footprint. Can we go up is one of my questions. I would like to build a stick-built house, same frame, going up so that I can put bedrooms upstairs and add a laundry room and expand my bathroom, because frankly it's made for very small people and all of my kids are like 6 foot. So that's where I stand. I support my neighbors being able to expand their houses because like I want to go up to expand. I like my garden space instead of going wide. I was raised in a house that was raised above the floodplain, and it really helped keep any bad things from happening to our house. It did shift the foundation, but one of the concerns is that the flow will take our houses down the river. Every year when it floods, I watch that creek that goes through our back slough, you know, the slough that's there. The meandering flow, even during flood time, is not as extreme as has been predicted by some of the people here that have talked previously. The rivers, however, do pick up, but it doesn't seem to affect the slough quite as much as I thought when I first moved in it would. The other part is the only way that that speed is going to pick up to the point that it will take off with our houses. It might shift them a little bit, but it won't take off with them at the speed at which it runs. Even during flood time, I talked to people who survived the last one. The only way that the current will pick up to that point is if the dam fails, we end up with a tsunami coming up the river, or they let out all the water in the dam to keep it from failing during flood time. Those are the only cases in which our houses would go floating down the creek and the river, or a major crazy weather emergency, which I watch this every year. I grew up where it happens every 10 years or so. So it's very important to me and my family that our house not float away and that everyone's safe. I think those need to be taken into consideration when you're deciding whether or not we can expand our homes. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Next up, it looks like, it's a little hard to read, is that Jean Widmer? Is there someone in Harris Hall signed up where I might be butchering that name? Okay. Diana, I'll turn it over to you for an online queue.
Thank you, Chair Trieger. At this time, if you have registered for this meeting and wish to give public comment on this item, please raise your virtual hand and I will call upon you in the order your hands are raised. When I call on you, I will unmute your microphone and you will have the option to be on camera as well. So if you can let me know if you'd like to be on camera, that would be great. Our first speaker will be James Babson, followed by Lori Siegel. James, I will unmute your microphone, and if you can let me know if you'd like to be on camera, that would be wonderful. James, you're self-muted. There you go.
Thank you. No, camera is not necessary.
Okay, I will start the timer, and you may begin your public comment.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for commissioners for this opportunity to speak. I'm James Babson of Lowell, and just briefly, I want to state that I'm opposed to including language in this ordinance that would expand the footprint of replacement structures. The previous two hearings, all the testimony, all the discussion has been about the mobile home park on CV Loop Road and expanding the footprint of single-wide mobile homes. 2 weeks ago, I believe Commissioner Farr expressed sympathy for those people trying to raise a family in a cramped single wide. The language of the ordinance never talks about single wide mobile homes, never talks about CV Loop Road, never talks about homes at all. It talks about structures. So if language is added to increase the footprint of structures in the floodway, it's going to have far-reaching consequences outside of the mobile home park that everyone is talking about. A large house somewhere in the floodway in Lane County with a barn and a freestanding garage and a shed, if that all gets lost and needs to be replaced, every one of those four structures would be allowed to be expanded if language is included to expand the footprint. So just again, I think it would be a poorly worded ordinance if this language to expand the footprint is included. It would have unintended consequences, and it would be, I think, an example of bad governance to have a poorly worded ordinance like that has unintended consequences. So that'll do it. Thank you for the opportunity for speaking.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker is Lori Siegel. Lori, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment and let me know if you'd like to be on camera.
No, thank you.
Lori, there you go.
I don't need to be on camera.
Okay, I will begin the timer and you may begin your public comment.
Thank you. My name is Lori Siegel, speaking on behalf of Landwatch Lane County. We support the ordinance that staff brought before you today without any expansion of the footprint for the many reasons that we've already testified about before both the Planning Commission and this body. I did submit additional comments this afternoon in writing about some of our concerns with the ordinance. I also wanted to point out that before the Planning Commission, this issue of difficulty to replace old single-wide manufactured homes was raised. We did some preliminary research, and that's in the record, and I submitted it again today, showing that actually now, maybe because of the small house movement, there are a lot of alternatives to single-wide mobile homes that are in the configuration of a rectangle. Landwatch is not opposed to stick-built homes necessarily. The ordinance doesn't restrict them to respond to the previous speaker's question about wanting a stick-built. Reconfiguration of the footprint isn't prohibited by the ordinance. And the preliminary research we did regarding availability of manufactured homes that are small in size showed that many of the offerings are less than $50,000 on the new market. So it does appear that there are alternatives. Building up, as one person suggested today, would be an alternative. Having one of these newer, small manufactured homes, not in the shape of a single wide, would also be an alternative. And from a public policy perspective, it just doesn't make any sense to further encroach on an area that we know carries dangerously fast floodwaters during a catastrophic event. Catastrophic weather events are happening more frequently throughout the country and throughout Oregon, and it would be devastating to see people lose their homes as to flood just because of making decisions that were not in their own necessarily own best interest. So for that reason, we support, again, the staff's recommendation that you adopt the ordinance as is today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your public comment. I do see one other person has signed up, but their hand is not raised, so I will give one more opportunity to raise hand up. Okay, Robert Emmons, I will unmute your microphone, and you may begin your public comment. Robert, I show you're self-muted.
Can you hear me now?
There you go. Yes, would you like to be on camera?
I'm fine without being on camera.
Okay,
So that's
I will
Robert
begin your
Emmons.
timer.
Robert Emmons on Little Fall Creek Road, 40093. I'm going to stick pretty much with the comments I offered at the last reading, but I did want to add one thing that hasn't surfaced as an issue that I thought was interesting in the record, and that came from, it was a comment, actually a statement in writing from George Curran, who was a former planner in 1984 with the county, and he said in his statement that this mobile home park was a non-conforming use, and as such, in the floodway, should be treated as any kind of non-conforming use, which does not allow expansion. And so I just wanted to add that as a possible addition to consider, and also along with other comments, totally in support of any reconfiguration of the spaces there. And I thought the comment from the initial person testifying in this, on this issue, one of the owners there about going up, that's something in one of the, I think some of the comments I offered, I certainly suggested as well. And I don't think we certainly have no objection to that. But I do think, particularly when we consider structures in the general, it's not just the dwelling, it's other structures on the property, could be expanded. You go beyond this mobile home park, and this would apply to any place. It gets to what Mr. Babson was saying, and that's that we get into a much, much broader issue and much more concern. So I think the main the main thing to bear in mind here is that we're talking about floodway occupation here. And floodway is high velocity water. And if it hasn't happened yet, it can happen down the line. So that's pretty much what I want to say today. I may have comments later. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Chair Traeger, that is our last person online, so I will return the meeting to you.
Thank you, Diana. Is there anyone else in Harris Hall wishing to give public testimony on this item? Yes, would you please step to the podium? State your name for the record, and when you do the 3-minute timer, which I'll ask Diana to reset at 3 minutes, state your name for the record and your timer will begin. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Kathy Damewood, and I'm an owner of a home in the Mobile Life Estates. I've owned 2 others in the last 20 years. A lot of the people living here are low income and deserve the right to hope and happiness, just as we all do. Those opposing the change footprint are obviously quite happy in their nice-sized home. If a catastrophic flood comes through this manufactured home park, there would be a lot of other homes coming down with it. Many of the residents living here have resided there for many years and deserve to have a new home, a larger home, if they would like to. My other comment is I have owned 3 of them there, and I've sold 2 of them. And my first one, I changed the footprint, and I went and had my elevation guy, water guy come in and do all that. And we had to raise it up about this high. If that's, why was that an option then, but not an option now, is a question I have. And, my main thing is that people living there, they just want to live in happiness. They don't ask for a lot. They ask for a little bit more room to move around. Maybe they may have to care for someone and have to move them in there. They're like you and I. They just want that little extra. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. I don't see anyone else in the hall, so that will conclude public testimony. And I will turn it back over to staff for any additional comments at this time before the board has an opportunity to ask staff questions and have a discussion on the item.
Thank you, Chair Trieger. There were a few comments that I wanted to address just to simply provide clarity. Lori Wellborn's comment about building up or building a stick built, those are both options. This code is not prohibiting the replacement of a manufactured home with a stick built, and it's not prohibiting the replacement of a manufactured home with a stick built that's multiple stories. So that is an option. And then Kathy Damewood's statement about why they had to elevate previously and why that's not an option now, that is still a requirement. So say someone came in to replace their manufactured home in the same footprint, they would still have to get a permit, a floodplain permit, and they would still be required to elevate. And I think that's all I can address at this point. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. Before I turn it over to commissioners for questions, I want to ask, just so we're using the right terminology too, my understanding is a floodway is basically the river. There's just no water in it currently, but in certain events it becomes the river, and that's different than a floodplain, which is an area that can become inundated with water when rivers or other waterways levels rise. Is that accurate, or can you give a description, and to what extent what we're talking about here, it matters to make a distinction between something that's in a floodway versus a floodplain?
Yes, so the floodplain is, the floodway is part of the floodplain, but it is a more hazardous designation of the floodplain. So it is more like the main channel of the river, and during a flood event, the most highest velocity waters are going to be flowing through that area. And it's also the area that's reserved to discharge the base flood, meaning during a 100-year flood event, that's the area that basically shouldn't have any development in it, because it is the amount of land needed to discharge that flood event. So that's why it is more development is more restricted in that area because of the need for that area to be clear to discharge those floodwaters and due to the high hazard of that area.
Thank you for that. And I have two other things before I turn it over to the board, just for sort of some level setting for our conversation. Do we know how many residential properties are built in floodways in Lane County?
I don't have that information on hand. It is something that I would be able to tell you, though.
Great, thank you. And finally, to that, just sort of a reminder, this assignment, the reason we're hearing this was made as a board assignment in the fall of 2021, I believe, to an extent in response to concerns around rebuilding after Holiday Farm fire. So while we've been hearing some very compelling testimony, I think all of us are quite sympathetic to a specific group of folks that are coming forward now who are learning about this because of this mobile home park. This is not code related to mobile home park development or any specific location. This is county-wide code that we're establishing with the highest priority of protecting life and safety. And just as a reminder, because it's really easy to get caught up in the individual testimony of what's in front of us today, but this has really been a matter of looking at amending our code for quite some time, and will probably have implications, will definitely have implications for properties well into the future. So just keeping that perspective. And with that, I will open it up to commissioners for questions for staff or other information that they need at this time. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. I just have a couple of clarifying questions. We're working with FEMA and NFIP as far as the regulations, the standards that we're meeting or exceeding. Is that a correct analysis?
That's the basis of our floodplain code because Lane County is a participating community in the National Flood Insurance Program. These regulations that we're dealing with in this code amendment are dealing with higher regulatory standards that were adopted in the previous code amendment projects.
Higher regulatory standards than FEMA and the National Floodplain Insurance?
That's correct.
So we are exceeding the requirements?
That's correct.
Okay. And remind me again, what does the FEMA or National Floodplain Insurance say about footprint size, regarding expansion of footprint size?
They don't have any specific regulations on the size of a footprint or the replacement in the floodway.
So any restriction on footprint size would be a Lane County regulation?
That's correct.
And I would assume that FEMA and NFIP also places the highest priority on life and safety.
Yes.
Yeah, they're silent about increasing the footprint size.
Yes.
Okay. So if we increase the footprint size, we're not running afoul of FEMA, we're not running afoul, we're just using our own intuition to, based on whatever it may be, to say no increase in the footprint size.
Correct.
And it doesn't affect any higher level regulations. Okay, well, that seems fairly clear to me. Thank you.
Commissioner Buck?
Thank you, Chair. I've been rolling this around in my mind for a while now, and especially since our last public hearing with a lot of folks. And in the reminder of how we got to this place from the Holiday Farm fire and what it meant to rebuild in the wake of that devastation. And even though we're talking about floods and not fire, it's important that just because a place may be in a floodway and has never had a flood doesn't mean it can't. And I'm also thinking about my brother who is in California, and they're having massive water events down there, and the way in which they're all trying to deal with that. I think we're lucky that we actually didn't get hit harder up here in Oregon than what they're seeing down there. Building in the floodway, which is basically, again, part of the river, as was mentioned, is inherently dangerous and very risky. And a lot of the mobile home parks were built on lands with
with the non-conforming use permit. That it was just, it happened often back when they were really building a lot of them. Because of the huge risk, we're actually being asked to determine a trade-off. The risk of somebody building in a floodway and a flood coming through and destruction of homes versus being able to provide more housing in the area. So it's almost public safety versus housing, knowing that we need far more housing than what we have. And the incredible risk of developing in a floodway actually makes me wish we were actually having a policy discussion about how we can help assist people, especially our most vulnerable and low income, from moving out of a floodway into a higher, safer place to live. We've not had that policy discussion because we've often simply allowed building in the floodway and not necessarily considered that we could potentially do more and mitigate that risk of people continuing to build in a highly dangerous location versus being able to assist them to build in areas that were safer yet more affordable, or at least the same affordability level. And I'd like us to consider that in the future. We can't move large communities all at once, or and even individually is not necessarily an easy task. But if we were really thinking about public safety in the long term, we'd be talking about how to move people from locations in the floodway onto higher, safer land. Thank you, Chair.
Commissioner Seneca.
Yes, Ms. Ursula. So let's just kind of take a step back. Now, I think I know the answer. What is the motivation for this floodway ordinance other than what Chair Traeger was speaking about of actually figuring out the footprint? What is the footprint size have to do with this floodway ordinance? I mean, what to get back to why do we think 1,000 square feet is better than 1,500 square feet, I guess?
I can give a little bit of background on how we got here. That might be helpful. So during the last ordinance adoption of revisions to the floodplain code, there was discussion and a board assignment to define the term footprint, because in that version of the code, in the current version of the code, all new development is restricted from the floodway, except for this handful of things that need to go in the floodway. And one of those things is to an exception to allow the replacement of structures that already exist in the floodway. And in that language, it says, yes, we acknowledge that there's existing development in the floodway, and we're going to allow replacement of those existing developments in the floodway, so long as they're in the same footprint. And the board assignment came from there was discussion about ambiguities of what footprint meant. And so the true board assignment was to define that specific term. During that ordinance adoption process, there was public comment regarding and discussion by the board at that time. There was comment and discussion about should there be an allowance to expand the footprint. So that was something that was on staff's radar at that point. So upon completion of that, adoption of that ordinance, we went into the phase of implementing it, and we were continuing to get public comment about the difficulties replacing within the same footprint. So we had the board assignment for footprint. We knew we'd be revising the floodplain or floodway code. And we took those comments into consideration when we took a draft code to the Planning Commission. So the draft code that was taken to the Planning Commission satisfied the board assignment to define the term footprint, and it also explored the possibility of proposing an expanded footprint. And then, as you know, it went through the Planning Commission process, and the Planning Commission did not recommend having that expansion.
Gotcha, okay. Because somewhere in there, and this is where FEMA kicks in, has to do with flood insurance also, right?
Yes.
So,
Would you like me to speak a little bit about that?
well, we've gone through that here, but I do have a question about the flood insurance part. How certain are we that not allowing this footprint or not to expand is going to lower flood insurance?
Yeah, so that's a difficult question to answer. I can, again, give a little bit of background.
Yeah.
So throughout the adoption processes of the floodplain code in the past, by adopting these higher regulatory standards, the floodway restrictions being one of those higher regulatory standards, we received a higher rating in the community rating system, which gives an incentive or a discount on flood insurance for adopting these higher regulatory standards. So that's a very complex review process, this community rating system, or the CRS. And so they look at all of the floodplain management practices that our program does. They look at our code, and there's specific points that are applied to different things that we're doing. So that audit happened after adoption of the higher regulatory standards, and we did receive more points for the CRS program that led to a greater discount on flood insurance. But it's hard for me to specifically say how much these specific higher regulatory standards that apply just to the floodway, how much did that contribute to us getting a higher rating?
Right, okay. That's kind of what I was thinking, and part of that was, thanks, Commissioner Farr. So that would, geez, where was I? Now, we removed some of the building that was allowed in the floodway, also part of that flood insurance, if I recall, where we raised the level of what was allowed for foundations a while back in a different ordinance.
That's correct.
So I guess it's kind of what I'm thinking and feeling here is we're raising requirements and restricting requirements. We're not allowing people to expand in hopes that we'll have lower flood insurance, but we're not really sure what that savings is. I mean, that's.
We do know what that savings is. So in the CRS program, I'm going to reference my notes quickly so I don't get it wrong.
You're doing great, by the way.
You would think I know this off the top of my head. So we were previously in the community rating system, we were class 7, which gave us a 15% discount, or you would get a property owner in Lane County who got flood insurance would get a 15% discount on their insurance premiums. And we are currently now a class 6 in part because of the higher regulatory standards that we've adopted. We are now a class 6, which gives us a 20% discount.
Okay. So it's a 20% discount. Mm-hmm. We can't, there's some places we have to raise or not build, and then places where we can't expand. That leads to cheaper. Okay. I think that's it for now. I just, the thing I really struggle with is, I heard, I think it was bad governance used earlier. And we get a lot of pressure that bad governance is telling somebody that with a 1,000 square foot mobile home that they can't be in a 1,500 square foot mobile home. I mean, it kind of goes both ways. So I really struggle with limiting the size of somebody's house. And we talk about it floating down the river, and if you're looking at a 1,000 square foot mobile home floating down the river versus a 1,500 square foot, I don't know if you're going to notice much of a difference. It's floating down the river. Good for now, Chair.
Vice Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm like Commissioner Buck. I've been gargling this around my head for quite some time, and I can hear both sides of the argument, you know, about Commissioner Buck's desire for people to get out of the floodway, but the fact is the entire lower Willamette Valley is a floodway. If the dam breaks, my house is going to be underwater, and my house is a foot out of the floodway. So I was in a neighborhood during the 96 flood. Most people congregated at my house because it was 8 inches above the flood plain. But every single house that was in the floodway in my neck of North Springfield never got water in it. The 96 flood, in this case in Seaview Loop, if we're talking about what hazards exist and thinking that we're calling a floodway a river, it's not. And I need to clarify that for the public. It is a potential area where water can go, but if you classify it as a river, I think that just feeds more fear-mongering, and I'm not here to do that. I think the other thing that kind of bothers me about this is this started as one thing and it creeped into another. We really have two issues here. We have an issue of defining the footprint and what is a footprint, because that was really the original ask by Commissioner Bozovich in September of 29. And his reasoning, and I looked at that tape a number of times, and his reasoning was because it was ambiguous. And I think these are two separate issues that need to be treated as two separate issues. And so let me put this forth, and I'm going to make a few statements, and then maybe I might ask a question, but I just want to say this. Originally in footprint, when you look at construction, footprint is defined as the horizontal and vertical building area of a dwelling or structure measured by the outside of all exterior walls and support columns, including garages and accessory buildings over 200 square feet, that the particular property size, zoning, and topography will allow by local codes and covenants. That's a pretty clear definition of what a footprint is. And I'm wondering in Lane County, why can't we adopt that? And then talk about this other thing about the floodway, floodplain development, and what we are allowing or not allowing a person who owns a piece of property to limit them on what they can put on their piece of property. You know, back in the old days, that was called eminent domain, when government restricted people from doing what they wanted to with the property or took value from the property of which they thought they had. So, like I said, I think this is two separate issues, and I'm not really inclined to tell people who have scratched and clawed their way to the top of the food chain to buy a piece of property and put a house on it, that now that their structure and their houses are dilapidated as such that they can't put something on there to their own liking. I remember too also in 2021 the county passed ordinance 2008 and adopted a major amendment to the floodplain called a type 2 no rise application. So I think that we're covering our safety bases for building in the floodway and the floodplains in those areas where we are hesitant because of water restrictions by this no-rise application. Case in point, one of the public testimony people said they had to raise up their home a certain distance. And so I think we're taking care of the safety hazards of that. And if we're talking about taking people out of that by some means, that's a pretty big bill for the county to mend. Moving people out of their property that's of certain value. And this property, like I said in last testimony, it got water on it in 1996, but it wasn't because the water level of the river rose. It was because the septics and the infrastructure backed up and put water in the streets. So I want to caution us about the fear-mongering of where this is at. And countywide, I think that people have building rights, and I wrote this down because I want to make sure I said it clearly. I said, most important, property owners have what's called a building right. And that building right means that they can build on their property what is rightfully allowed, and that this footprint limits this and is one more example of housing and freedom restrictions. We have safety measures in place in a separate no-rise application. We have a definition of footprint I think we can use, and I think merging these two is something I'm not going to support.
I just want to make sure, one of the things, as I recall in reading one of the concerns that came up, again, we're not trying to make code specific to mobile home parks, but for those, is that some of the language allows for a reorientation or reconfiguration of how, so it's a total square footage is the footprint, rather than if you were to trace the existing dwelling and then replace it, it has to fit the traced outline. It's just saying this much ground taken up. And that was, I think, as I recall from going on 3 years ago when this came up, again, it was in Holiday Farm Fire rebuild, was, you know, if you cantilever a deck, is the shadow of that deck part of the footprint, or is it the, right? So, but is that right? So in a way, somebody who wants to replace specifically a mobile home or a smaller home, they can reconfigure or reorient to make a more useful layout for their home, right? So we're not,
Yes, that's correct. We've included language that allows reorientation or reconfiguration because we recognize that there are manufactured homes that exist on properties now that are in a certain dimension that may not match a dimension that is currently for sale.
I also want to appreciate Commissioner Senega for bringing up, so that was a question I have, sort of what is the problem we're trying to solve for here, right? And it was, the assignment was to provide clarity of the definition of footprint for replacement of a dwelling. So this isn't about, or I should ask how, if in any way, would this impact someone who buys a bare piece of dirt and wants to build on it?
This does not affect those.
Correct. So this is just for replacement. Thank you. Go back to my script. Are there any other questions or comments from the board? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you for the second round, Chair. Just a couple of comments as I attempt to clarify things in my mind. The first one, this kind of came up as the discussion went along, the discount on floodplain insurance. 20%, I think, is what the number that you gave. But we're not sure whether this provision has an impact on that 20%.
It certainly did. I just can't.
We don't know how much.
I can't tell you if it were to be removed, how that would impact our rating.
Okay, good. That's clear. Then, you know, I am really in favor of moving people out of from hazardous areas and into places that are less hazardous. Steep slope with tinder downhill. You know, let's move people into places where they're going to survive in case of a natural emergency or natural event. But regarding moving people from lower levels into higher levels right now, we received a presentation, Ms. Morkowski, from Steve Adams last week regarding our need for housing in Lane County. And the number that's been given is 3,200 units a year as a goal. This is a county that is, over the last, I think it's 10 years, has averaged 1,200 units a year. We don't have places to build right now, whether we're moving people from an existent structure, from an existent residence, or whether they're moving into the community or graduating from high school. We don't have places to build. 3,200 is a daunting number. And don't you think that if, this is a rhetorical question, don't you think that if we had such places, they'd already be in the pipeline, we would already be building in those areas, whether it be inside urban growth boundaries or outside of urban growth boundaries. So moving people from an existent dwelling in this defined floodplain to a new dwelling and abandoning the dwelling, as I would presume that they're in, we're just adding to that 3,200 houses that we need per year just to meet the goals that we have projected. So I have an issue with, you know, with using that as an example of why we shouldn't allow people to make a more comfortable home where they're living. And regarding, we're not looking at adding new houses with the footprint issue. We're just looking at modifying existing houses. And, you know, whether it be adding a little bit of space for the people, whether it be allowing them to live more comfortably, allowing them to expand their family maybe, without having to change residences to stay in the place that they are. I'm in favor of that. You know, I want to find a way to make that allowable. And it seems as though we're not, in fact, we've already stated that we're not running afoul of FEMA or the National Floodplain Insurance Program by allowing for residences to be expanded. Now, the other question surrounding that is other dwellings beyond residences. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in residences, allowing people to have a more comfortable place to live if they're living in a smaller place. And certainly the ordinance that we're looking at is not restrictive to CV Loop. Obviously, it's to everything from the top of the Three Sisters all the way to the Hasita Head Lighthouse, a county the size of Connecticut. We're looking at the whole thing. But I don't see an issue with that because the same issues that we're talking about here exist throughout the county in places where people would like to expand the existent residence, not add a new front door, not add a new residence, but make the place that they live more comfortable, easier to live. Maybe, once again, expand their family. Maybe allow for a relative to move in with them by adding a laundry room or another bedroom. And without going up, you know, because as people go up in age, going upstairs becomes less and less an easy thing to do. You know, people like to live on single story dwellings. All of this is a part of the big discussion. Any one of those things that I have said can be discounted, can be eliminated. But when we add all of these things together, I believe that we need to consider allowing for a 50% expansion of the footprint on residences, not on other dwellings, but on the primary residence that's in place. And that is, we're looking at how to move forward with this ordinance. That is an amendment that I would choose for staff to put into the next reading, that we would allow for a 50% addition to the footprint of the residence, of the primary residence, on the property in question. With that, I'm anxious to hear what anybody else may have to say, but I'm not talking about building bigger barns or building bigger wood shops or building a larger outhouse. What I'm talking about is a place that people call their primary residence, where they're trying to eke out their existence and trying to live in comfort. 2 weeks ago, I talked about my personal experience with that, living in a single-wide mobile home. We're not only talking about single-wide mobile homes, but I am talking about single-wide mobile homes right now. If it's a 450 square foot or whatever it is, and you're trying to keep your family in there, it's the only residence you have, you can't afford to move. There's no way you can move to higher ground because you can't afford higher ground. You can only afford where you actually are. I'm in favor of allowing that. I am. Thank you.
Commissioner Seneca.
Yeah, this, just real quick. So we've established we're more stringent than FEMA. Have we looked at any comparable counties to see what they're doing, say Marion or?
Yes, when I initially worked on the first code revision and considered these higher regulatory standards, I did do quite a bit of research on what other counties and jurisdictions do. I couldn't tell you the specifics of that in this moment, but it was looked at.
Okay. Did you find this what this ordinance, how it's currently written, to be close to that, or?
So I did see other counties that had restrictions on floodway development, and in no way did their codes drill down to the level of detail that this code does. I am picturing one example. I can't recall exactly where it's from, but they did use a similar language of footprint, but didn't have that defined, and they didn't have any exceptions. It was kind of just the statement. So I think what we have right now provides a lot of clarity compared to other jurisdictions, but I'd have to go back and look at those examples.
Okay, well, thank you. I mean, where I'm at is if we're going to stick with, we don't want to be more restrictive than federal or state, then I'm going to stick with that. Thank you.
Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Once again, and maybe I've asked this question before, so forgive me about the insurance thing. I keep spinning around this. It sounds kind of like my wife going and buying 3 pairs of cowboy boots in different colors because they're 10% off, but doesn't want to participate in the argument that she spent $240 to get said boots. So I'm thinking with this insurance thing, we're raising the level of the responsibility of people to get insurance, but we're giving them 20% off when some of them wouldn't have to buy the insurance in the first place. Is that correct? If we kept to the minimum amount of the standards rather than increasing them?
No, nothing that we're doing with this code directly relates to someone's ability or requirement to get insurance. It only provides an opportunity to have, by adopting these provisions that the board has adopted, it allowed residents who are getting flood insurance to have a discount on that flood insurance.
So did I hear you correctly that because we're appealing to a higher standard, that no other people who would have before not been required to have insurance now be required to have insurance?
No.
Are we sure about that?
Yes.
Okay, because I've heard some contradicting stories, so I just want to make sure for the public that we're really clear on that. What I'm asking is are we, by our increased standard, causing more people to have to get insurance, and thereby trying to sell that by saying we're going to give them a 20% discount? That's what's going on in my head.
I am not an insurance agent, so I can't speak specifically to who is required and who is not required to get insurance, but my understanding of the National Flood Insurance Program and flood insurance in general is that this code revision would have no impact on the requirement for someone to get flood insurance.
If our standard was higher than the minimum.
Correct.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Yeah, so if I'm understanding you, as I'm hearing you, it's sort of the difference between everybody needs car insurance, but if you have a car with certain safety features, you have a lower rate of insurance. It doesn't say whether you do or don't need the insurance. Correct. Thank you. I want to ask a question and also point out, as Commissioner Farr was talking about, he wants to see this happen. Just a reminder, this only applies to unincorporated areas of the county. We are not making policy for any of the cities. So when we're talking about people being able to build, it's not impacting those areas. I think his point, I heard him asking, and we'll see when we get to that point if we're going to have a motion to approve as presented or ask staff to come back with some adjustments, potentially some language that creates structure versus dwelling. I heard that potentially. And forgive me if this is in there and I missed it or I'm just not remembering it. Is there anywhere in the ordinance, or when does the ordinance kick in related to the reason for replacement? In other words, if we pass an ordinance for footprint that says you can go as much as a 50% increase, which is a lot, with replacement, is that potentially clearing the way for, let's say, speculators to come in and buy small homes on certain lots to make them larger, to turn them over, flip them, what have you? What are the parameters that in which for replacement in which this would kick in? We're talking a lot about natural disaster, fires, floods, and so on, but what are the other ways somebody could need to replace and thereby gain 50% footprint of a home, which of course would be a more valuable home?
In this code, there are no sideboards on the reason for replacement. It's simply an allowance, providing an avenue for someone with an existing structure in the floodway to be able to replace that. May it be because that structure was damaged, or the other side of the spectrum is just that they simply want something different.
So the reason for replacement isn't relevant, nor is the owner of the property? Does it have to be the same owner who is replacing for this to be in effect?
No.
Thank you. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Trigger, and thank you for bringing up that last point regarding speculation on upgrading a home. If somebody does increase a 800 square foot home to 1,200 square feet, for instance, it increases the value clearly. So it increases the value for the person who owns the home for the resale value. I mean, that's a given. But the other part about that, now you're not from the assessor's office, but it also increases the tax that Lane County receives. Lane County and the people who distribute taxes to receives as well. Is that correct? I knew you're not from here. That's an unfair question because that's not your field of expertise. But I think I can answer that. I think it goes without saying that it does increase the taxes that are received based upon the increase in value. It also increases the wealth of the owner. Now, I'm not talking about making people wealthy. I'm talking about people without actually going out and seeking new assets, increasing their personal holdings and wealth on the existing asset that they have, which is the home that they live in. So their home is it goes up in value. They buy the building materials from someplace, so people who sell the building materials get the job. The builder builds it. The homeowner has a more expensive house, and we get more taxes. Oh boy. What's the downside on all of that? I've not sought it yet. I've not found it yet, but and I'm sorry. I'm asking you questions that really are unfair of me to ask, so I'm going to throw them out as more rhetorical questions than expecting an answer. But I think, Mr. Morkrowski, I'll look at you, that really, if a home is increased in size, it's therefore increased in value, or its taxable value goes up because of the increase in value. And I don't see the downside regarding the economic impact of that. I don't see a downside of the economic impact.
I'll respond since they were rhetorical and not directed at staff, nor are they really questions for the administrator. They weren't really, I think they were prompted by my comments, which were, if someone of great means buys a home from an 800 square foot home from someone, that person who owns that 800 square foot home realizes the benefit of selling an 800 square foot home, but the well-resourced person then builds a 1,200 square foot home and sells it at a great profit to them. That was my point. I'm pretty sure you understood that to be my point. Thank you. Vice Chair. And then Commissioner Buck.
No, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Commissioner Buck.
Thank you. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I actually appreciate the conversation because the investor, in this case, in this scenario, could easily come in and take advantage of a particular situation, and we have no sideboards on that currently. Doesn't mean we can't, but we could. The argument of being able to do that in order to get more taxes seems very self-serving for us as a county, at the expense of public safety. I actually, hands down, don't think that we should be building in the floodway. I think much of the conversation that we've had today has really minimized the public safety aspect of what's going on here. And I really want to elevate that. If we were talking about an area that wasn't in a floodway, I would probably have very different opinions and conversation with the rest of the board. But let's not minimize the huge safety issue we have with putting, more than likely, more vulnerable people into a situation where they would likely invest a larger portion of their own money because lenders don't like to lend for the same reason, the high risk of placing a dwelling in a floodway. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I think we've probably exhausted the conversation as it is to the ordinance as written. So our options now are to, if anyone is prepared, to make a motion to close the record for this public hearing. And our options are to, in any case, to move to a third reading, or excuse me, to approve this third reading and set a fourth reading and continue the public hearing for, with a date certain. And it's just a matter of which date. And the near-term date that we have available to us is to move the ordinance as presented forward. And we have a later term date if there are particular points members of the board would like to see written in for our consideration. I did hear, I don't want to presume, so I'll look to Commissioner Farr that he wants to maybe hear language that separates out structure from residential dwelling or something along those lines, unless there is a motion to approve the ordinance as written. So I am looking to the board for a motion to help guide us in our next steps. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. I'm looking for the appropriate date, Ms. Ursula, so maybe need a little bit of assistance on that. But I move to approve the second reading and set a third reading, close the public hearing, and continue deliberations to a date certain, which date I'll look to you for. Because the balance of my motion includes adding language that allows for an increase of the footprint size. I wish it could be more, but I'm only going to go 50%, because that's in terms of a home, that's a relatively modest amount, 50%. But it includes only the primary residence and not other structures. Now that's pretty vague, but you're pretty good. You've demonstrated an ability to take my vagueness and make it into real language. So.
The date reserved for further out is March 12th, 2024.
So then Chair Trigger has moved to approve the second reading, set a third reading. I'll wait for
It's a third and then fourth.
a third and then
This is the third reading, so
third and,
approving the third and setting a fourth.
and I don't see the discussion of the fourth as a part of one of the options. But setting up, okay, I'm just looking at the board packet here. And setting a third and fourth reading to include language that increases the footprint allows for increase of the footprint by 50% on the primary residence.
Chair Farr, or Chair Trieger?
Yes.
If I can get a clarification on Commissioner Farr's motion. At one point, he mentioned closing the public hearing, and then he did not keep that in there, so I just need clarification on what's happening with the public hearing, please.
Then if I may ask, should we close the public hearing, or should we continue the public hearing since it does change the language of the ordinance?
My recommendation would be to keep the public hearing open if the proposed code is going to be changed.
So that's my motion. Tell me if that's not clear enough.
So there's a motion to approve the third reading, set a fourth reading, and continued public hearing for March 12, 2024 with a 1:30 time certain. Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Farr, seconded by Commissioner Senega to approve the third reading, set a fourth reading, and continue the public hearing to March 12, 2024 with a 1:30 p.m. time certain. We don't need a roll call because we're not adopting the ordinance, correct? We're just moving on the approving. So
Just a clarification of a Chair Trigger, just that includes a 50% language. Very good. It doesn't need.
well, that's we'll make them. We'll pass the. We'll see if this motion passes, and if it does, then we can have discussion to the motion as to what should be included, right? In the fourth reading and continued public hearing.
My understanding was that the motion would include the revisions so that staff can come back with an ordinance that reflects those.
The 50% and the separate structures from residential dwelling.
Yes.
Language. Correct. Thank you. Then I will, is that clear to everyone what we're voting on? Great. Then I will call for the vote. All those in favor signify with an aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. Motion passes 3-2 to approve the third reading, set a fourth, continue the public hearing for March 12, 2024 at 1:30 p.m. time certain to bring back language around structure versus residential dwelling and the 50% increase. That's it. Okay, reading through all the if-thens that we don't need because we got that done. All right, then that concludes this item for today. Thank you so much, Ms. Zerslev, as always, and for our representatives from County Council's office and planning for being in the audience should we have needed to call on them. Moving ahead on our agenda, the next item up, 13, is Commissioner's Business. I will look to the board to see if there are any announcements or other Commissioner business today. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to, as a maker of the motion last week, I'd like to wish to move to reconsider Order 24021-30-02 in the matter of approving new classification and salary plan for non-represented positions.
I'll second that, reconsider.
So we have on the table a motion. The motion is only to reconsider. Should the motion pass, we will then discuss what reconsideration of that motion might mean, and I'll look to our administrator for any clarification of process or other information we might want to have before we move forward.
Chair, it's my understanding from County Council that procedurally, Robert's Rules does not allow for a motion to reconsider beyond the same day that the original decision was made, so reconsideration would have had to happen last week. That's my understanding from County Council. However, a motion to rescind is possible. This was not my original understanding of Robert's Rules, but I'm not an expert in Robert's Rules. And I just had a conversation with County Council on that. So that was my understanding, is that the motion, there could be a motion to rescind, and then you'd need a majority vote to rescind, a motion and a second, majority vote to rescind, and then you could direct as a board assignment to come back with another round of discussion. So I'm the messenger on this one.
Restate my motion.
So, great. So were we to take any action on this, we need to basically undo and then start over on the item.
Understanding, yeah.
And so I would ask the maker of the motion if there is something that we can address of your concern outside of doing the process over, because this was a policy decision, a 5-0 vote by the board, which is now in its implementation phase, which lives with staff. And so that's what I would ask of the maker of the motion. If there is another opportunity in process to get reports back from staff on implementation and next steps that would satisfy the intent of coming back at this policy decision that sets up a structure that is now underway being implemented.
Well, I understand that. I think that the motion to rescind has to be made prior to us having the discussion about it, is my understanding. I'm happy to open a discussion prior if that's in order.
I'm just asking to make sure you still want the motion on the table.
I do.
Now that it's a motion to rescind, not to reconsider.
Yes.
So
I wish to move to rescind order number 24013002 in the matter of approving new classification and salary plan for non-represented positions.
So there's a new motion on the table.
Yes, to rescind.
I will second the new motion.
There's a motion and a second, so now we can have discussion to the motion.
Chair, if I just
Commissioner
may
Buck.
ask the maker of the motion, why?
Yeah, I've got, like you said, Chair said that we're a board of policy, and I wanted to just remind us of what was in the board packet as policy that we voted on last week. And Lane Code 2.020.025 states that the board shall cause to be prepared and shall adopt a position classification plan. The duties and responsibilities of all positions shall be analyzed, and each position shall be assigned to an appropriate classification according to the similarity of duties and responsibilities. There's been recent information that has revealed that our approval of this order has not been fair to some. It's excluded input from a few, even after members of this board asked in our public forum and assured this was the case. We are a board, let me remind people, my colleagues, we are a board that continues to laud our care and respect to our valued staff and county employees in the highest of equitable standards. Therefore, I feel this matter, which we were not under any deadline or mandate to complete sooner or later, needs further vetting. It needs more analysis and thought to everyone affected before it's brought before the board again, so that we can maintain our deepest integrity and equity policy to our people.
Commissioner Seneca?
Yeah, I'll just, real quick, why I seconded it. It's a little simpler than Commissioner or Vice Chair Levels. I think the work that Ms. Kaczynski did and Ms. Holmes is great, and I think it needs to be done. I think the way they explained our current process and what the end game is makes sense for the county. I just think maybe the implementation needs to be looked at, and maybe a little better communication with some of the staff. I received some complaints from some of the staff that received a different version of what was happening than others, and I just want us as the Board of County Commissioners to know that everything's going to be transparent from top to bottom. Let's look at the implementation and come back and get this through. I think they did great work, and it needs to happen. It's just in the implementation.
Commissioner Buck?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to actually ask our county administrator the thoughts on this, because I clearly hear from the maker of the motion, if you were to rescind it, that the policy itself needs re-review. But the second on the motion was about operation, which is two different things, two completely different issues. So I'd really like to ask the county administrator your thoughts on these issues that have been brought up.
Chair, Commissioner, thank you. I would say that, for the record, we have had this compensation system for non-represented employees, which represents about 360 of our employees in the organization. It's a very large number of folks. We've had this system in place for well over a decade. It has been a very challenging system, and we for years have sought to change it, to clean it up, to make it more clear and a better reflection of the actual type of work that folks are doing. So we actually expanded the number of classifications to better define a lot of those positions. Our staff spent well over a year on the analysis, so there's been a lot of work. I can assure you that every single employee affected was communicated with. Everyone received an email with either a survey, if we didn't have a job description, asking for folks to fill out the survey, or with the job description that we had, because we had more recent information about that. But everyone received those emails and was, had the opportunity to review it and provide feedback. We did briefings with all departments. We worked with each of our department heads. I specifically actually asked for a delay in bringing it forward to the board by several weeks so that we could identify any positions that potentially in the future would have some change in their range. And we had those communications. Those employees have subsequently, to my knowledge, responded and expressed appreciation for those communications. The board staff was asked last week if there was any of these 360 individuals that are negatively affected financially from the decision. The answer was no. The answer is still no. So to my knowledge, there's one individual that has had a concern about, not about their position, but about someone else's position and the change happening to somebody else's position. I should also say this is what the board did last week was the first step in a 3-phase process. So you essentially approved the job titles and basic job descriptions. That's phase 1. Phase 2 will be for us to go and do the detailed specifications for each of those jobs to further refine the information that was developed. So there's an additional opportunity for staff to provide feedback if there's anything that was missed in that first phase. Then there's a third phase in which we would go out and do a market review like we do for all of our positions to determine what is the appropriate range and compensation for each of those. So I will say it is absolutely within the board's right. You made a decision last week, you took a vote on this. You have the right and the ability to rescind it and make a different decision. We can bring it back for more discussion. We can provide more information to you. But I think you will hear our staff provide a more thorough and detailed overview of what I just said. So we can do that if the board would like. But that's, hopefully that helps to answer the question.
I appreciate that. From that, what I get is that it's not an issue of the policy itself that we passed, but maybe the transparency issue that you brought forward and ensuring that all employees know how it's going to roll out in the future and have a chance to communicate that before it comes to us. I certainly don't want anybody to feel like they're blindsided, of course. And that may be a report back, really, about how we're moving through the changes of that policy decision. So for that reason, I won't support the motion itself as currently stated. Thank you, Chair.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair. First, Ms. Murkowski, regarding Robert's rules, Robert's rules say you move the motion during the same meeting at which the original motion was made, In addition, many governing bodies allow the motion to be made at the next regular meeting. Your rules of procedure have higher authority than Robert's rules. So we have precedent in this body of previously of doing it at the next meeting. I'm cool with with what we're doing right now. That's fine. I think we've got a process in place where we can have a discussion and move forward in a very positive fashion. That's what I'm hoping for, Mr. Murkowski, is from this moment forward that we take care of any concerns that 1, 5, or 10 individuals may have regarding their personal specific situation based on the policy that we passed. And you've described a 3-part process. And let me try and restate that. Actually, you restate it. One is a market analysis. So the first step is the board approves the policy, allowing you to move forward. What are the next 2 steps?
Well, the first was actually the job, what you did last week was the job descriptions and the titles. The titles and the number of classifications and where those land preliminarily, and then the basic job description. The second is a more refined, detailed job specification process where we'll continue to refine those positions and identify, and that will be an opportunity for any additional things that were missed. And we've communicated that with any employees that have expressed had any questions or concerns that, hey, we're still early in the process and there's still opportunity to refine all of those things. We should note, again, there's 360 employees that are affected by this. So there's a lot of cleanup. There actually, we have positions that are misclassified that are not classified properly. And that's what a lot of what is happening. And so again, the board has the right and the ability to rescind the action, but I worry about the information that led to that decision to do it and the impact that a rescission would have more broadly on the larger number of those employees. So that's two, is the specific job specification, and then the third is the market analysis, where we go out and we say, okay, we have these job titles, we have job descriptions, classifications. Now we're going to go survey the market and say, because our positions will actually be closer to other like positions in our comparables, that's one of the things that we've struggled with, is actually doing a market analysis in these places because the jobs, either the description, the titles don't match up. That's the third phase that will happen.
Thank you.
Sometime later this year.
Well stated, and that's in the record. Then, I'm not certain, to the maker of the motion, I'm not certain that we need to rescind the order to get the action that's desired regarding any misses in communication, whatever it may be, whether it be for one staff member or for 10 or 20 staff members. Bearing in mind, and I'll say this out loud, we're not in this classification. We're not in any classification. We're elected employees. We're not represented. We're not represented. So we're not talking about us. So I just want to make that very clear. So I don't know that we need to rescind the order and go through that, what may be a cumbersome process, in order to follow through with the steps that Mr. Mokrajewski has given to us. That take a look at the classifications and see if any adjustments need to be made. And I have a couple of questions myself that kind of came out of it, because with 360 employees, it's difficult for any one individual to take a look at every single line item, other than Ms. Kaczynski, who did such an excellent job in bringing all of this together and bringing it to us last week. So I think, based upon what Mr. Mokrajewski said, and I'll look at the maker of the motion, that can we, in fact, get our desired action to take a look at any specific job that may need a little bit of may need some kind of a change in its definition, whatever it may be, and then move forward with a market analysis. And my questions don't need to be raised in public right here. My questions can be forwarded to you just as informally. For instance, does this job classification really take into account all of the things that the person involved in that job actually does? Does it do it? And if the answer is yes, then we're fine. If the answer is no, then what changes need to be made in the description or that job classification, whatever that job classification may be, and there are a lot of them. So that's my thoughts on this, is that we have a process that Mr. Mokrajewski has defined that does give us an opportunity to take a look at the action that's been taken and even modify it somewhat as we take further actions toward the final implementation, which is, I think, July 1 is the date we're looking for. Is that correct? Or it might not even be July 1. In some cases, I think it's even a couple of years down the road regarding any adjustments in pay. And
and just to be clear, the reason that the timing element of this, I'm just looking for a note that I had here. The approval last week was the first phase of this so that we could get it into the budget. So that was the reason for the timing of bringing that forward. And then the detailed job classification specifications is the next phase that's going to happen. So there will be another, as I said, another opportunity for folks to give input on that. And I did just get a note from Ms. Holmes saying the classifications will be drafted. The classifications will be drafted in the next phase 2. And the board approved structure and the titles of the classifications along with the salary plan is what was approved last week. So
So I'll just state it in one more sentence that I think that maybe we can move forward without the maybe more cumbersome passage of this motion. We may have steps already in place that really satisfy the intended or desired outcomes. So.
Yeah, so in fact, to kind of follow on to that, if I'm understanding, rescinding the motion kind of sets us back to square one, whereas letting the motion stand sets the stage for the next steps, which is really where the concerns lie, where, as Commissioner Senega mentioned, the implementation, the communication plan of the impacts of that decision is what comes next. So it just puts us right back where we were before, but the information, we have to do this, we have to adopt this new plan to then set in motion these next steps that you outlined, which are really what I'm hearing from this conversation, the information that board members are wanting and needing to make sure we have right. So.
And I again want to say, I already said it, but just to be clear that every employee was provided the information before the plan was brought forward to every single employee that is in this group was sent a communication with either the job description, the job specification, or was asked to fill out a survey if there wasn't enough information provided.
And with existing job descriptions, it was a survey because you don't have one, help us build one,
Exactly.
or here's the one we have for you, is this the
We've
one?
had it because we've reviewed the position in recent years, and so this is the information that we have, but please take a look and let us know if we got anything wrong, or hey, you're in a newer position, it's not really well defined, would you fill out the survey and tell us the details? And so that was the process that we went through to get the information in order to develop the classifications. And then we provided that information out to all departments, offered opportunities for presentations and briefings and individual meetings, and Ms. Kaczynski met with numerous staff and departments across the organization and took a great deal of time and effort to make sure that everybody understood. And so, but even if there was something that was missed or some pieces of somebody's job that was missed, there's still an opportunity to get those things corrected. And that's been communicated, at least with the one person that I know that has raised a concern.
And this is about a year-long process?
Over a year that we've been working on this, yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Well, then with that, we still have a motion on the table. Does the motion stand?
I could withdraw the motion.
Great. Motion has been withdrawn.
Yes, to approve.
Second,
Seconder approves the withdrawal of the motion. With that, I will look to the board to see if there are any other items of business for the day from the board, or announcements, or future board assignment requests. Commissioner Farr.
I have a bit of announcement, and it's 2 minutes early, but I'm going to do it anyway. At 3 o'clock, Senate Rules Committee meets in Salem, Mr. Margaisky, and a Lane County employee has been nominated by Governor Kotek to be on the, let's see, it's the, what's the name of that committee? It's I'm 2 minutes early on this, but it's a 7-member committee for governing body over social workers. I'll tell you the name of the committee in just a moment. But what that committee does is, once again, it's 7 members that looks at all of the issues surrounding social workers in the state. And it's 7 members. The Senate is going to be approving Governor Kotek's recommendation of an employee of Lane County. And that employee is Patty Farr. Who is a social worker here in Lane County.
Congrats.
Are there any other announcements or future board assignment requests from the board today? Seeing none, review of the no assignments that were made. We can forego the review of assignments. We have no need for executive session today. Is there any other business from the board or from our administrator today? No. Okay, then with that, I will adjourn us for today. I will note that the board does have a scheduled activity tomorrow, beginning here in Harris Hall at 8 a.m., and then a training, which is a training session. Training sessions are noticed on our public agenda for informational purposes only. They are not open to the public. Trainings are structured and facilitated to avoid any discussion of official business, and no such decisions of official business will occur. And that is why I will recess rather than adjourn us. So we are recessed until tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. And we will also have a 1:30 p.m. regular meeting in our Board of Commissioners conference room tomorrow afternoon. We are recessed.